Episode 190 of the Interpretation Station is Call to Order. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new episode on today, the 10th of September 2023. How are you all doing? You will be pleased to know that the Interpretation Station has come up with a new format of episodes. It occurred to me that I was going to create a format where I would teach you just some of the new words, new expressions, new tricks that I had learned in the space of the last week. It's actually the last 2 weeks to be exact. But I thought that it might be interesting, you see, if I can share with you some of these words. I can share with you the contexts in which I learnt them in, and that might help you also better remember these, what I think are fairly important words. Now, you know, what I could do is I could just say to you, I could just give you just a random word, okay? I'm going to give you the word in French, right? Hameçonnage, okay? And I could just say, hameçonnage, that means fishing. Fishing with a PH, okay? Fishing. Now, this is a free word I'm actually going to give you for this this episode. I could just do that. I could just give you lots of just random words, but let's face it, without a context, you aren't going to remember them, are you? However, you might just remember hameçonnage on this occasion because, fish. So this is to do with phishing on the internet, okay? People trying to rip you off, people trying to extract people's passwords, okay? And I only learned this word a few weeks ago, actually, in French. And yes, hameçonnage. Did you know that? The way I remember it is weird. Like fishing, okay, it's almost spelt the same as like a fish, right? But it's just not an F, it's a P and H. And then to me, in my weird brain, hameçonnage sounds like almost sounding like another animal, the poor little hamster. So for some reason, okay, hamster. For some reason, I just connect the two, fish and hamsters, and that's how. And I have run into that word, hameçonnage. So there you go. There's a free word for you. But so I'm not going to just give out random words to you. I'm going to give you words, expressions that I have heard, and I'm going to give you the context, and then you can that way better internalize them. All right. So I'm going to start with words that I've learned in Spanish in the last couple of weeks. And also, do you like the catchy name of the new format? Okay, do you like it? New. I've learned this week. I shouldn't swear. It'd be bad for the algorithms if I swear. So yeah, we have a catchy little painting there. That was my daughter drew this about 4 or 5 years ago. I'm not quite certain why. It occupies pride of place in the Interpretation Station bathroom. I do quite like it anyway. So, yes, moving swiftly on. Spanish. What do we learn in Spanish today? Okay, well, I'm going to start you off with, and I'll give you the context, okay? So I did quite a few meetings of the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, okay, the CERD, okay, as it is known. And one of the most interesting words that came up was, well, there was discussion, you see, about they were doing a country review of Malawi, okay, and they were drafting their report, and then there was an issue over one of the courts basically deciding not to take up a case that had been brought by a member of the public because the court ruled that it did not fall within its fuero. Okay, fuero. Now, I'd known this word, to mean I know the sort of original meaning of the word, like a charter. You'd have like a city charter back in the centuries ago, and that's called a fuero. But I'd never been entirely happy with what to do with it in regular cases. And fuero, the best go-to word, like word, I think, is jurisdiction. Okay. Now the context was that the speaker said something along the lines of el Tribunal Supremo ha rechazado su fuero. Okay. It was something along those lines. And then there was also talk about military jurisdiction, okay, fuero militar, okay, they were talking about whether the case fell within the military jurisdiction, fuero militar. So I thought that was a really important word, and that's one that comes up a lot certainly in Spanish legalese. Now, what else did we have that came up during that week? One of the other members in that Committee on Elimination of Racial Discrimination, he at one point, a little bit of Latin American. You have these Latin American words that crop up sometimes. You have to be careful. The most popular is maybe tengo una consulta, okay, like a question. I think everyone knows that one, right? But it was just the expression de repente. And obviously, I always, with Castilian Spanish, it's always suddenly, isn't it? De repente. But of course, you have to remember that the Latin Americans use de repente to mean perhaps, maybe. And he said something along the lines, oh, de repente podemos hacer eso. Perhaps we can do that. Not suddenly we can do that. That wouldn't sound right? Interpreting. So just be careful with the Latin Americans. They sometimes use de repente for maybe. Then the first day I was back, I was also in a meeting of what's called the G21. Okay, it's within the Conference on Disarmament. And you know how they have the G77 plus China within the General Assembly? Okay, that's basically a big group of developing countries, least developed countries, and that's their sort of big caucus, okay? And they often, vote as a group, so they wield quite a lot of influence, obviously, if there are 77 of them. Well, in the Conference on Disarmament, there are fewer members, but they still have the equivalent, which is called the C21. And you have a lot of African states, a lot of Latin American states, and it was being chaired by Venezuela. And the Latin American states always tend to be quite talkative. They always have a lot to say. And actually, there was Cuba, I think, that spoke. And the lady asked, hey, yo quería indagarse si blah, 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 indagarse. Now, I'd heard of indagar meaning to investigate. And then I was a bit slow here. Like I say, it was day one back at work after 5 or 6 weeks away. But indagarse just means to inquire, if you hear that, okay? Then what other little words, little snippets came up? So there was a meeting, again, just to be careful, in a meeting, the chairman's giving the floor, no vi su pancarta, the flag, okay? When somebody wants to speak, they raise their pancarta, which says, I don't know, Spain, okay, la pancarta. Another one that came up that week that I liked. Now, this was actually during a meeting of the CRPD, the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Now, most of that meeting was in English, okay? And because it was in English, I thought, this is a little tip, by the way, okay? If you're feeling a bit rusty, or just really, even if you're not feeling rusty, even if you're feeling good before, when your half hour is on, this particular applies if you're in the English booth. We do have these times when we're not actually doing anything, we're just sitting there waiting, is to listen in to the interpretation of one of the other booths and, try and cross-reference words that are spoken on the floor with what the Spanish booth, how the Spanish booth is rendering some of those words. It's a good way of just gradually expanding your vocabulary, and it means you're doing something worthwhile with your half hour, even though you haven't got the mic switched on. So I was just listening to the Spanish interpreter. Some interesting words she used. We had, they were going through a report. They were talking about one of the headings in the report. The word she used was encabezamiento. Okay. A complaint. That's always a very important word, right? A complaint. Again, in legalese, complaints brought by members of the public. Una denuncia. Okay, a complaint brought, a complaint filed, a complaint lodged. By the way, remember that group of 3 words when you're those collocations for a complaint. Okay, lodge, file, bring. That's just another quick little tip there. Another word I found interesting, okay, this can go in French as well, dotarse de una estrategia, that's what they were talking about, okay, and I guess in French you can say se doter d'une stratégie. Okay, now I usually go for some reason with acquire, se doter de quelque chose, and that's usually it works, but I get, with certain collocations with the strategy, for example, we adopt, you can just say adopt, okay, nos dotamos de una estrategia, blah, 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 we adopted a strategy. Okay, with words like that, I think it's better to say to adopt. And then another very straightforward word, right? Recursos escasos, okay? El problema de los recursos escasos. Limited resources. You could say scarce resources. You could just sort of use the cognate, it'd be fine. I just think in English we would perhaps more being likely to say limited resources, but certainly in Spanish they use it like to say escasa. So just remember again, maybe that little like for like set of solutions: escasa and limited. Oh, and one final one for you in Spanish, which is now I'm going back to my meeting of the G21. Did I call them the C21 before? The G21 in the conference on disarmament, and they talked about los riesgos y los peligros que nos acechan. Okay, that's a word I've heard a lot of times. Okay, you want to have a nice little English solution for that. So the dangers and risks that lurk. Okay, to lurk. Right, remember that's a word you're going to hear quite a bit. That lie in wait if you want something similar, but lurk is just one syllable, and it's a really good fit. Okay, what did I hear then this week in French? Okay, one of the most important things again here in French, we're going back to one of these meetings, I think it was the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And was it perhaps Malawi again? I think it was, talking about judges, okay? Talking about tenure of judges, okay? And often the French, so again, I was cross-referencing English versions of a report with a French version of a report. Le mandat des juges. Now you can just say the mandate of judges, that's fine. But really they talk about their tenure, okay? How long their period of tenure is. And you have a related word to that. They often talk about security of tenure, which in Spanish is inmovilidad. Okay, it's a very important issue. It's all about guaranteeing independence of judges from the executive. And in French, that word is. Yes, I had to just double check that. So yes, so security of tenure for judges. They talk about them being inamovible. Okay, so mandat is often tenure when it comes to roles like that, positions like that of a judge, and then security of tenure is the inamovibilité in French, inamovilidad in Spanish. Look it up on Lingua, you'll find inamovibilité is given as non-removability, but that sounds rather clunky in English, so you talk about security of tenure. There was another context, okay, the same meeting again, and it was Turkmenistan, there was a country review of also Turkmenistan, and during it, the Algerian member of the committee, the Turkmenistan had been talking about how they're mediators, how they've mediated conflict, that's how they see themselves, trying to keep the peace in the Central Asia region, and how they're sort of partners, well, should we say, both sides in the Russo-Ukrainian conflict, and they try their best to sort of are trying to mediate some sort of resolution. Anyway, so the member asks them if they have actually tried to. So he just said intervenir dans les conflits russo-ukrainiens. To try and bring to bear on the parties. And I just, again, recently back from holiday, I just went with a cognate. I just said intervene. I rendered it as, have you considered intervening in the conflict? And then later the word came to me again that I should have gone for the best word in English, is to intercede. When there is a conflict and a sort of broker, a middleman tries to get between the parties, the warring parties, and try and negotiate some sort of peace deal. In English we talk about interceding. Have you tried interceding between the parties? That's a really, really useful word, really good word, and it's better than intervene. Intervene is a bit general. Intercede is really specifically to get in the way of two people fighting and try and broker a peace between them. Now, one other very important word that cropped up in the SERG was to do with, again, back to the Malawi report. The committee was drafting its report following the hearing with the Malawi delegation, and they were talking about the various religious groups that different religions generally in the country. Okay, in addition, outside the mainstream ones, and the word that was used. The initial report had been written in French, okay, and they used the word culte, okay, les cultes religieux. Now in French, obviously that word culte does not, I believe, carry any pejorative meaning. It's just a neutral word. However, fine well in English, we talk about cults. You hear a cult, and your immediate reaction is, Okay, in English, there's definitely a pejorative meaning to the word cult, and the way it had been rendered in the English version of the report, I think they just kept it as cults. Okay, and one of the members flagged this up. I think saying that, look, this isn't right. This is portraying those groups in a negative light. If you're calling them cults, what's the best way to get around this? And I think in the report they ended up going with beliefs. I think it was maybe referred to in the original report by the Malawians. I think they called them religious beliefs. Des cultes différents. So religious beliefs. And I think that is a good solution for the word cult, because it's a word that again comes up quite a lot when you're talking about countries, the religious makeup of a country. When you talk about cult, you don't want to call them cults. Call them, I think, beliefs. Okay, belief systems, beliefs, something like that. Okay, so that's the French for you. So finally we'll move on to what I learnt in Russian over the last week. Okay, and the focus of that really is that same country review of Turkmenistan that was held, and there was a couple of very interesting little expressions that I learned. So first of all, a couple of little short ones, fairly easy ones, okay, but that I'd not heard of before. But взят в заметку. The head of the delegation said at one point, one of the committee members raised something, and he said, "Okay, I didn't know about this, but I'll take note of it." Взят в заметку. They usually. You hear more typically принимать в сведению, but this so взят в заметку. I had a bit of a guess. I figured I knew what it was, but there you go. If you hear that, взят в заметку, to take note. Now, an important word in Russian, неприкосновенность. Okay, this comes a lot at the official level. And it depends really on what is being referred to. What is неприкосновенный? Now, in this case, it was неприкосновенность частной жизни. Okay, so this is privacy. Okay, this is the right to. They were talking about the right to privacy, the right, for the government not to stick its nose into your business. So in that context, неприкосновенность частной жизни is privacy. If you are now, however, you also will hear a lot неприкосновенность границ. Okay. Now that is inviolability. Okay, that's very important. That's when you hear that quite a lot at the geopolitical level. So if you're not certain, I guess the safe word to go for is inviolability, and then if maybe you say it and then you hear частная жизнь, okay, the inviolability of one's privacy, you can just sort of paraphrase. But if you just hear it as a package, неприкосновенность, право на неприкосновенность частной жизни, the right to privacy, неприкосновенность границ, the inviolability of borders. One other interesting little thing that came up in that meeting is one of these interior ministry goons that often come for the ride to these hearings. He kept on using this acronym LRD. So I'm still in the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, by the way. And he kept saying LRD, and he used it the third time, and I'd sort of fudged it. I wasn't certain what it was, so I went and asked the Russian booth, "What's LRD?" Well, it turns out, of course, that in Russian this committee is called Комитет по ликвидации расовой дискриминации. That's LRD is elimination of racial discrimination. So just on the off chance you're in that meeting doing one of the Russian speaking things and they talk about LRD, they're talking about the insert, the elimination of racial discrimination. Another important idea that comes up a lot in these that came up here in these Russian meetings when it talks about sort of correctional issues, penitentiary issues, prisons and so forth, all the colonias that you have they're used throughout, right, in the Russian speaking world, in Russia, in the Stans. And how do you render these different colonies into English? So I'm going to give you the most important colonias. They mentioned a couple in this meeting, and it's important to delineate them, to basically tell them apart. Воспитательная колония. In English, I think we call that a juvenile or youth detention center. Okay, I think I've been in a hurry and I've sometimes said borstal. You can use that word in English. It's a bit of an old-fashioned word. Trouble is, it's very short. Borstal, two syllables. Youth detention centre, 6 syllables. But anyway, I think if you really want to get the best rendition into English for воспитательная колония, a youth detention centre. Okay, then you have, it's often used also in these colonias. They often use it together with исправительная колония, these correctional colony, correctional centre. You'll hear that often collocated with, I'm seeing here, исправительно-трудовая колония, a correctional labour colony, a work farm. I've heard of those, a work farm. That might be. That's maybe not a bad expression to know. Исправительно-трудовая колония. Now, the 3 levels, okay, and you have all these colonias and they've got different regime. Okay, so the 3 most important to remember. Исправительно-трудовая колония общего режима. Okay? Maybe they'll just say колония общего режима. Minimum security facility. Colony, whatever you want to call it. Okay, and then you have a step up from that is колония усиленного режима. I've definitely heard that, okay. That's medium security, okay, medium security facility. And finally, for the real bad boys, you have колония строгого режима, maximum security facility, colony, whatever. Or we also say high security. So remember there's minimum security, medium security, and high security. I mean, even in English, you might, unless you really work a lot with the in issues to do with prisons and corrections, you might those expressions might not even trip off the tongue really in English for you. But so just remember them like that: minimum security, medium security, high security. Okay. And finally, in Russian, a little package of words that again is very interesting that came up in the context of national service in Turkmenistan, and I guess most of these stans have national service. I think Russia probably does as well. And the 2 words, so they were talking about, they were talking about people who were objecting to military service, but then they were talking about the procedure of what happens when someone is called up. And what basically happens is that you receive your повестка. Okay, повестка. Now, I'd only ever known this word really used in the context of повестка дня, okay, the agenda. But your повестка are your call-up papers. Yes, didn't know that. And what do you do with your повестка? You take it to the военкомат. Now, I know I more or less could imagine what a vojenkomat was. It's obviously got something to do with the military. Okay, but the specific word that you want is a recruiting centre. You take your call-up papers, your повестка, to the vojenkomat, to the recruiting centre, and then you're drafted into the army, right? But those 2 words, I thought, again, very useful little package to know whenever any country is going to be talking about issues of national service. And there you have it. Those are that is some of that I learnt last week. Okay, do you like the format episode of those words? Has that helped you maybe, has that helped you, again, learn and internalize a couple of new words? If it has done, please do tell me in the comments. If you have a solution for any of those words that I've mentioned today and you have a better solution, please do also tell me in the comments. Do love getting the comments. Either way, should I do more? Should I do more of these? Do you like these? If you did like it, please do smash the like button. Please do share. Please do subscribe. And that's pretty much all for today's show. I hope you've enjoyed it. And all that remains to be said is that episode 190 of the Interpretation Station stands adjourned.
The train is now leaving the Interpretation Station. We hope you enjoyed your visit. Until next time.